Jai Shri Radhe, Jai Gurudev. On the instructions of our dear Gurudev and with his mercy, we continue our study of Caitanya Caritamrta, Adi Lila, chapter
Recording
4,
stopped.
by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, of course, and in the translation from Bengali and with the commentary by Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We're entering our 13th week of reading Caitanya Caritamrta Adi Lila 4. This chapter, which is the foundation of the house of bhakti that we're building. This spiritual biography of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is a spiritual biography of every soul that ever heard of or gave respect or attention to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So if on the one hand we're studying in this very long book, Caitanya Caritamrta, if on the one hand we're studying the way the material and the spiritual in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu evolve and change and are perfected, we can also put ourselves in this spiritual evolution and remain aware and attentive and conscious of the way our own souls are evolving, or rather the way the relation between our material existence and our soul is evolving. The soul does not evolve, it's eternal. But our consciousness of our soul changes. Most often, and hopefully in the direction of deepening and broadening. What this work, Caitanya Caritamrta, tells us is that even Lord Chaitanya went through a process of discovering his soul, discovering that he was Krishna, discovering that Krishna is arriving in the mood and in the form and the shape and from the position of Radha. And this is, from a certain point of view, the discovery that we are making as bhaktas. For the new beginners, we are discovering that we are a soul. The more advanced devotees are learning how to research the character of that soul and to discover in that soul the presence of not something impersonal and flat and dry and unmoving, but rather the farther we go into discovering our soul through our practice, the more we are amazed and very pleased to find that this soul is fundamentally loving, that this soul is in its very nature devotional, that the very purpose and meaning of our soul is to love the divine in a devotional way. By devotional way, we understand through serving, through doing service. So we're all on this path, and from a certain point of view, Chaitanya was on a path, but we're all on the path of discovering just how deeply this nature of ours as lovers, as loving devotees of the divine, how deeply that goes. And what's really quite wonderful is that it's not a painful path. It's not even a difficult path. Anyone with higher realization will tell you that looking back upon the path they've walked, that it was surprisingly easy. The answers to our questions are right there. We just cannot see them. So this work, this book, Caitanya Caritamrta, but also very much this chapter that Gurudev has advised us to read, is about that discovery, going deeper and deeper into the soul and discovering just what the depth of that loving, that natural loving devotion is. And last time we spoke, it was on verse 60, which I'll talk about again now today. Verse 60, which was introducing this idea of ladani shakti, the pleasure potency, the pleasure energy, which is one of the internal, the spiritual energies of Krishna, and which is one of the very qualities of the universe and of every one of our souls. And this is the most, I should say, exciting quality of ourselves that we can discover through our devotional practice. Through our practice, we see more and more clearly and more deeply that the energy that keeps us alive, the energy that helps us to do what we do in our lives, is the energy of pleasure. And by pleasure, we of course don't mean material pleasure, but the energy of loving pleasure. So that somewhere, somehow, on every level of our existence, the motor of our lives is the desire to give love. To give love in our work, to give love in our family life, to give love to Guru, and at the highest level, to give love to God. Prem. We'll come back to this in a moment, but this is where we've come in our research about the soul. And again, I repeat that what's so nice is that the research that Lord Caitanya is doing on his soul in this book, this spiritual journey he is on, is very much like the spiritual journey we are on, going deeper and deeper into our own hearts, our own souls. Last time we read verses 57 to 60. So a very quick reminder that verse 57 was simply a statement of what we already knew. Most of us already know that Radha Mohan, Lord Caitanya, appeared in order to relish the flavor of divine love, divine loving, remember, relish what it must be like to love Krishna. So Krishna before Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was, well, he continues to be, nothing has changed on that point. He was beloved by all, and in particular by the gopis. so loved, and he found this love so beautiful and astonishing that he wondered, what is it like to love a God in this way? So the purpose of his appearance in Caitanya Mahaprabhu is to answer that question. What would it be like to relish loving, giving love to the perfect being, loving God? And so he decided to do an experiment and try. And this experiment became the greatest gift to humanity that has ever come. The gift of knowing that the highest spiritual experience is loving God. And second, that every single soul, every single jiva has a part in contributing to that loving. The highest is prem, first, and second, everyone is a potential servant of that prem. Everyone is by her nature a servant of divine love. Everyone is by her nature a manjari. This is why we speak so warmly and so often of manjari bhav as the mood of the devotee. The manjari bhav is the mood of the one who serves directly and purely the love of God, prem. So when we presented this verse, it was verse 57. It created some questions about the difference between knowing and feeling. Krishna said, I want to know what it feels like to love God. So I will appear again as Caitanya Mahaprabhu. And that led us to ask some very important questions about what we can know through feeling. And the way we understand knowledge usually as school knowledge, book knowledge, scientific knowledge. But where the knowledge that Krishna was searching for, the highest knowledge, the knowledge above all knowledge, is not in books. It's knowledge of the soul. So we almost have to replace the word knowledge with experience or divine experience or realization. Verse 58 talked about the position from which Krishna could have that knowledge, the position of Radha. And there again we talked about the difference between the position of Radha and the experience of Radha. And we said that in spiritual terms, position doesn't mean a place where you are, a point of view. It doesn't mean you go to the cinema and you're in the front row seeing, or you're in the back row seeing. Position here means what is the way your heart is turned so that it's open to that experience of love. So in these two verses, we try to translate the word knowledge into spiritual knowledge, and we tried to translate position into spiritual position. And these two things then came together in verse 59 very nicely. Because the verse talked about it, the verse said, well, Srimati Radhika is the transformation of Krishna's love. I'm citing the verse. Srimati Radhika is the transformation of Krishna's love. So we understand Krishna's love as an endless resource, an endless ocean of love, and it's often described that way in our books. What Radhika does is she puts it into motion. She puts it into action. She takes that endless gold mine of love and gives it, moves it, pushes it, transmits it. So Radhika is the one who changes Krishna's endless ocean of love into loving. And Radhika is the one who lets us understand, we bhaktas, that even higher than love, even greater than Krishna's ocean of love, which is everything, is giving that love. And we know that's the highest because Krishna said, I have everything I want and desire except one thing. I have all the love in the universe. I am the love in the universe. But I'm missing one thing. And that is the experience of giving the love. So even Krishna instructs us. He tells us, love is really very high, but something is higher. And that's the sending of love, the giving of love. And who is it that makes the giving of love possible? Excuse me. What makes the giving of love possible? Of course, it's Ladani Shakti. It's Radha Rani's energy, which moves the love, which sends the love, which gives the love. So maybe we could say that, and many of us do say, that Radha is higher than Mohan, Radha is higher than Krishna. But highest of all is the prem, the giving of the love. So when we talk about Manjari Bhav, we're not talking in a simple way of just replacing Krishna with Radha, say, well, we have one king, now let's have a queen instead. No, it's more than that. It's replacing this idea of an ocean of love with endless loving, which Radha embodies in her love for Mohan. So the highest level of divinity is the loving itself. The highest level of divinity is the loving itself between Radha and Mohan. And this is the task of the Manjari to serve. Right? You will never hear of a Manjari who is helping Radha to wash her dishes or to build her house or to, I don't know, drive her car to work. No. All the services that manjaris do for Radha, they have one goal, one purpose, to make that love flow. That is Manjari Bhav, service of Radha in the goal of making her love for Mohan happen.
Beautiful.
Shri Radha. So that brought us to verse 60, which we read a little quickly last week. So I'd spend a moment or two on that. Verse 60 was then about Ladani Shakti. And you know this is a very important topic, very important subject. Here was the verse in the English translation. Ladani energy, Ladani Shakti, gives Krishna pleasure and nourishes his devotees. So I don't want to repeat, but I want to remind you, it does two things, Ladani Shakti. It brings bliss, pleasure to Krishna. So Radha's pleasure-giving energy gives pleasure to Krishna, of course, that's what its purpose is. But it also nourishes, gives food, gives life to his devotees. When Mohan's heart is full of bliss, then the devotees' hearts are full of bliss as well. So Ladani Shakti at its highest level is the energy bringing divine love from Radha to Mohan. Yes, this is clear. But what we don't talk about so much is that wherever there is love flowing, it's because of Ladani Shakti. It's because of the pleasure potency, the pleasure energy. Wherever there is love, Radha is there. Her most important job is to bring the love to Mohan, obviously. But wherever love is flowing, then Radha is there. Because it's Ladani Shakti, Radha's Ladani Shakti that brings that love, that carries that love, that gives that love. All the love comes from Krishna as the ocean of love. And all love that is transferred through that Shakti, that energy of Radha. And this is so important to remember because it explains for us our own experience of love. We little fallen devotees, sadhakas. Devotion means releasing the Ladani Shakti in our own hearts. Giving love through service. Giving love to Krishna through our service. By whatever means, by sweeping the floor of the temple, by washing the dishes for our family, by driving the car. All of these things done in service of Krishna are channeling Ladani Shakti towards Krishna through Radha. And this is why I just want to remind you of one comment that came from the Vedas. So last week we discussed this, but I want to repeat it. There was a quotation from Jiva Goswami in Priti Sandarbha, the doctrine of love, where he quotes the Vedas, so the oldest books of Indian philosophy. And he said there were two lines that I want to repeat because they were so strong and special. The Vedas said, only devotional service can lead one to the personality of Godhead. This is something that most of us understand. If we want to have a relationship with God, it happens by doing work from our hearts, doing service from our hearts. It goes on, only devotional service can help a devotee meet the Supreme Lord face to face. And then finally, the last part of the verse that Jiva Goswami quotes, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is attracted by devotional service. And as such, the ultimate supremacy of Vedic knowledge rests in knowing the science of devotional service. Well, this says many things. One is that it says that Bhakti started long before Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Jiva Goswami is very pleased to say that, look, if you look back in the Vedas, you can already see there's devotion happening there. So that Bhakti is actually older than we think. But maybe more close to our everyday lives, it says that by doing devotion in our lives, we come closer to God. By letting that energy, that Ladani Shakti, come into our actions, by opening the gates to Ladani Shakti in our daily work, in our daily activities, then we come closer to God. Then we come closer to the divine. And that Ladani Shakti is, of course, Radha. So the task of a devotee like you and me, an ordinary devotee, is not to try to aim at the heavens, forget our lives and look up at the stars and pray to God. The task of devotee is to find God in our everyday lives. And where we find God in our everyday lives is in the feelings we put into our work, into our families, into our relationships. Bhakti means service done in love. Service to the divine done in love. So our greatest challenge is not to do greater work, it's to put more love into our work. You don't need to build a temple for God. What you need to do is put God into your work when you bake a loaf of bread. If you bake a loaf of bread with 100% devotion, you will have reached as much as 100 devotees who build a temple with 50% devotion. Okay, we'll move on now to one last word. That was it about Sthayi Bhav and Sanchari Bhav. Prabhupada had been commenting about ignorant people who don't understand the difference between impersonal spiritual experience and personal spiritual experience. Impersonalists believe that to come closer to God is to give up the personality. That liberation means giving up not only the material ego, but also the spiritual identity. So I often compare this to putting a cube of sugar into a cup of tea. The sugar is in there, but it dissolves and becomes part of the tea. And there is no personality to it anymore. And Prabhupada, of course, says that these people are not seeing the depth and the richness of having a relationship to the divine. And he uses the word variegated. So spiritual experience is variegated, and this is a big, ugly word, which means simply that it has a personality. It changes. It flows, it comes, it goes, it's high and low, and strong and weak, and deep and shallow. So then he explains that experience in bhakti has two kinds of moods. One is sthayi bhav, and the other is sanchari bhav. And sthayi bhav means the solid, strong foundation of feelings that we have in our devotion to Radha and Mohan. That there's a base, a base like a mountain which stabilizes everything in our life. Always sturdy, always fixed, always confident and sure about the nature of the soul, the nature of the relation to Radha and Mohan. But then there's another part to the experience, which is sanchari bhav. Once we know who we are, we have that foundation. Once we know who Radha is and Mohan is, then the feelings can come across us. The feelings of punctual pleasure, the feelings of momentary beauty, the feelings of momentary longing, of strength and weakness in feeling, of highness and lowness in feeling. These changes, like waves on an ocean, are sanchari bhav. Those emotions that come and go. Once we have the sthayi bhav, then we can relish this sanchari bhav, these feelings that come and go. So it is not a matter of saying that sthayi bhav is good and sanchari bhav is bad, but rather that we must first clearly have a sthayi and solid mood in place, and then we can more deeply relish the different emotions that come across once we have that emotion. And the best visual example of this is, of course, the water. We talk about Krishna as an ocean of bhav, and that Radharani is the waves. And that's exactly the image we can have of sthayi bhav and sanchari bhav. Once the ocean is there, once the ocean is massive and full and pure, sthayi, then the waves of Radha's feelings ripple across it. They're always sure that they'll be fixed to the ocean, and yet they bring waves that come and go and change our experience and remind us that we are personal. That emotions are something that are not a laser beam They're not a concrete block. They have a texture and a flow and an energy. But this is not possible to experience unless we realize first that the ocean of emotions is there below these changes. Verse 61. Satchitananda Purna Krishnara Svarupa Eka Ichi Chakti Tanra Dharatinarup. Prabhupada translates, Lord Krishna's body is eternal, full of knowledge, and full of bliss. His one spiritual energy his one spiritual energy manifests three forms. So now we come to this very important theme of Sat Chit Ananda. I'll repeat the verse now. Lord Krishna's body is eternal. Sat. So Krishna, the word is Svarupa, of course. Lord Krishna's form is Sat Chit Ananda. But Prabhupada chooses to say his body, which is correct. But to remind you that this is not the material body, this is the form he takes in his eternal existence. So Lord Krishna's body is eternal. It has Sat, so eternal existence. It was never not there. Secondly, it's full of knowledge, and in particular, self-knowledge, awareness, consciousness, that's Chit, and full of bliss, Ananda. Pleasure or happiness or transcendental happiness. So it's quite remarkable that when we describe the nature of God, there are these three things. I guess we're not surprised that God is forever, Sat, he exists, good. And we're not surprised that he knows everything, he has Chit, consciousness. But what is really surprising is that he's made of bliss, Ananda, pleasure, happiness, feeling. The very nature of the universe is feeling. So it's not just something that, a feeling is not something we have when we get a little bit of pleasure, like when we eat an ice cream. Oh yeah, that's nice, and then I eat the ice cream and then it's gone. No, feeling is part of what we are. Feeling and positive feeling, pleasure, is what we are. I grew up being taught that my feelings were something unnecessary. They could be useful. Sometimes an ice cream could give you a nice feeling, but mostly we should understand that the world is not for feeling. The world is for thinking, working, doing. So when we say and we learn, this is not just a bhakti idea, it's a very old Indian idea, that God is being, knowledge and pleasure or happiness, then it's very surprising. And this, I hope you see already, has beautiful consequences for bhakti. Because if God is feeling, of course, the place of understanding that feeling, of letting that feeling move and flow, is going to be very important to understand. So we have these three categories, and they're very old in the Vedas. Sat, Chit, Ananda. They're the qualities of God, but they're also the qualities of everything that God creates. So they're the qualities of our souls, too. Everything is made of these three things. Not just some faraway God, but also all the birds and worms and men and women and children are all made of these three things. Eternal existence, self-awareness or consciousness, and happiness. So now we want to ask, and it's a very big question, so I'll just take it a little bit, and maybe we'll come back again. What does this mean for our dear Caitanya Mahaprabhu? Well, Krishnadas Kaviraj, the author of this book, says it's important. So let's ask, why is that important? It's because Caitanya Mahaprabhu captures these three things through his life. Caitanya Mahaprabhu, like other things that appear in the world, has all three things. And maybe what's most meaningful for us is that the part about feeling, the part about bliss, about happiness. Caitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna who appears in the mood of Radha because he wants to feel something. He wants to have bliss. And in appearing in the form of Caitanya Mahaprabhu, he is taking up that part of the three parts, Ananda, bliss. And by giving us Manjari Bhav, by showing us that we are observers and servants of that happiness, he brings chit, knowledge or awareness, in the form of Manjari Bhav. The Manjari is aware, conscious, has knowledge about the loving relation, like nobody else does. The Manjari has intimate knowledge. The Manjari who is allowed to go into the kunj while the lovers, Radha and Mohan, are having their pastime. The Manjari who knows things about Radha and knows things about Mohan that can help them come together in their pastime, which not even Radha and Mohan know. So they are chit. Caitanya Mahaprabhu therefore comes as Sat. He takes a form, he takes existence. He comes as Ananda because that form is one of love. And he comes as knowledge, Chit, because he brings to us also Manjari Bhav, which is our way of being part of this pastime, being observers and helpers in the pastime. So it's a very special combination of things. In Caitanya Mahaprabhu, being, just to be, means to feel. And this message we can bring to our own lives as well. The purpose of our being in a material body is to have feelings and to realize the spiritual nature of these feelings. Second, to have these feelings is to know these feelings, to be aware of these feelings, to be observers of these feelings, and to be servants of these feelings. Already when I have a feeling of love towards my mother, let's say, and a question comes into my mind, what is that love for my mother, and how can I make that clearer? How can I increase that love for my mother? We're already in a kind of Manjari Bhav. Manjari Bhav, once again, is the mood of serving love. And wherever we, in our conscious being, serve love, we are taking the place, the position of the Manjari. We'll come back to this, I think. It's just an idea that's growing in my mind, and I try to share without being too difficult, without being too complicated. Verse 62. Anandam she ladini sadam she sandini. Chid am she samvit yare gyanagari mani. Translation: Ladini is his aspect of bliss, Sandini of external existence, and Samvit of cognizance, which is also accepted as knowledge. So here, Krishnadas Kaviraj is explaining what Satchitananda means. Ladini is his aspect of bliss, so the aspect of God, of bliss. Sandini is the aspect of eternal existence. And Samvit, cognizance, which is also accepted as knowledge. So we have these three elements of all the universe: Satchitananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. And Krishnadas is pointing out that these three qualities of the world, they're exactly the same as the three qualities of Krishna's internal energy, which are namely Ladini, Sandini, and Samvit. Ladini, as you know, is the internal energy of Krishna for giving pleasure, pleasure-giving energy. Sandini is the energy that is interested in the existence. And Samvit is the internal energy. Samvit Shakti is the internal energy concerned with knowledge. And now to explain this a little more, Prabhupada is going to quote again Jiva Goswami, this time in the Bhagavat Sandarbha. He says, Jiva Goswami explains the potencies of the Lord as follows. And now he'll go through the three different kinds of energy and compare them to the three different kinds of, the three different types of God. He says, the transcendental potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by which he maintains his existence, is called Sandini, the same as Sat. So Krishna has three internal energies, three spiritual energies. The one is Sandini, which is about with which he maintains his existence. The second, and I quote Jiva Goswami, the transcendental potency by which he knows himself and causes others to know him, is called Samvit. And what we called then before Chit. So we have Sat, Chit, and now we need Ananda. So here comes the third one. The transcendental potency by which he possesses transcendental bliss and causes his devotees to have bliss is called Ladani. So there we have the three kinds of energy that Krishna has, and they correspond perfectly to the three qualities of the universe. The third one, which is so important for us in Bhakti, Ladani Shakti, Ladani energy, is the one that causes Krishna happiness and causes his devotees happiness. Wherever the devotee is happy, there is Ladani Shakti. Wherever the devotee is feeling love, there is Ladani Shakti. And in different words, wherever the devotee is feeling happiness, love, any feeling at all, radha is there. So the next time you have a feeling in your heart, big or small, a feeling towards God, a feeling toward your child, a feeling toward your cat, stop right there and say, "Thank you, Radha. Nice of you to spend your day with me. Nice of you to be with me. Nice of you to spend my life with me." Very important point. What happens with Ladani Shakti for Krishna happens in a more simple way for every jiva. But now Prabhupada is going to go back up to the Krishna level of things, go up to the top level, and he says the following. The total exhibition of these potencies is called Vishuddha Sattva, which means purity, pure goodness. And this platform of spiritual variegatedness is displayed even in the material world when the Lord appears here. If we put all three of these energies together, the energy of existing, the energy of knowing, of consciousness, and most of all the energy of feeling, then this is called Vishuddha Sattva, pure goodness or purity. And this is present, he says, Prabhupada says, in every part of reality. All three of these things are present in every part of our lives. He goes on, the pastimes and manifestations of the Lord in the material world are therefore not at all material. They belong to the pure transcendental state. So the pastimes that Krishna carries out in the body of Caitanya Mahaprabhu, they are full of Chat, Sit, Ananda. They are full of existence, knowledge, and feeling, and happiness. And when we see Caitanya living them out in his body, and you've heard, and we've talked about how he manifests his relation to God by his activities. When we see these, we're seeing not material phenomena. we're seeing spiritual phenomena. Prabhupada says, the Bhagavad Gita confirms that anyone who understands the transcendental nature of the Lord's appearance, activities, and disappearance becomes eligible for freedom from material bondage upon quitting the present material tabernacle. Tabernacle means temple, sanctuary. So Bhagavad Gita says, if you actually understand that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is divine, and by understand we really mean if you realize what his divinity means, if you realize why he's come, how he's interacting with the devotees, how he's interacting with us, and how he leaves the body, then you too will be liberated. So it's another way of saying that the Satchitananda that's in Krishna is the same as the Satchitananda that's in you. And when you have understood that, when you've understood in the deepest sense of the word understand, realized the meaning of Chaitanya's life, the knowledge that he had, and the feelings that he carried, when you've really deeply realized these, when they've become like your own realization, your own knowledge, then you will have perfected your soul and you will be liberated. And this is, of course, why we read these books and why we listen to class and we talk with others and we chant and meditate, in order to understand the nature of the divine Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who has come. And then Prabhupada goes on and says, this person who is liberated can enter the spiritual kingdom to associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and reciprocate the Ladani potency in transactions between him and the Lord. So reciprocate means to give back the same. Which says that the more we evolve in our sadhakavesh, in our devotee bodies, in our material bodies, the closer the energy in our hearts comes to the energy in Krishna's heart. To the point where when we're fully realized, it will be the most natural thing that the love of God for us and the love of us for God are the same. There will be no difference in quality between the love we have and the love that God has. There will only be a difference in quantity. But in quality, all the different ways that we love and all the different ways that we see Krishna loving in the Raj Leela, the pastimes of Radha and Mohan, all this qualitative difference, all this beautiful variation, all the different colors and the shapes and the gestures and the forms, these will become completely natural to us. Therefore, says Prabhupada, mundane goodness, worldly goodness, being mixed, is called Mishra Sattva, which means, of course, mixed being, mixed existence. We are confused in our souls. We are partly in material consciousness, partly in spiritual consciousness. And we are blocked from experiencing the love that Krishna feels, that Radha feels, by our material consciousness, by our false ego. Enlightenment means, realization means, internalizing, understanding, as if it were our own feelings, what Radha feels. We often say that the Manjari knows what the Radha feels, so he doesn't or she doesn't need any instructions. In our practice as bhaktas, we need to have that as our goal and go through our days saying to ourselves, I feel a trace of Radha's love. What is she feeling in her whole being? What is Radha feeling? What will please Radha? The deeper we go into our own svarup, into our own spiritual identity, the more this will become clear. And Prabhupada is telling us here that once we've completely identified with our svarup, with our spiritual self, our spiritual form, then there will be no difference between the feelings that Radha feels and the feelings that we feel, except for in quantity. They will be exactly the same kind of feelings. So this is our research, to be attentive to what we feel, the tingles of emotion that come out in our lives, and to trace them back to their origin in Radha, to act like a detective. What is the cause of that feeling? Is that feeling pure? How can that feeling be made more pure? And as time goes on, this research will collect, like a good researcher, will collect many examples of feelings, purify them in the analysis, bring them all together. We collect and go deeper, collect feelings and go deeper. And when finally we've finished this task, we've understood all our feelings, we've gone to the heart of all our feelings, then we will be called Siddhadeha, perfected body. That's what it will look like. So most of us go around in our lives saying, oh my God, why did I do that? Why do I feel that? What am I doing here? But for the realized soul, these questions are all answered. And the path of our devotion is to find these answers. And what's curious and beautiful is that the form these answers will take will not be scientific knowledge. They will be in the form of how are my feelings the same as Radha's feelings? So by going deep into our own feelings, we will understand ourselves better and also become more acquainted with Radha. Prabhupada says now, Vishuddha Sattva is therefore the proper atmosphere in which to experience the personality of Godhead in his transcendental pastimes. So Vishuddha Sattva, again, a purified state of soul. Spiritual variegatedness, spiritual variation, is eternally independent of all material conditions and is non-different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, both being absolute. So when we fully explored all the variation in our feelings, fully realized them, there will be no difference between us and the divine. Again, except in quantity. In quality, we will have the same qualities of Radharani. So when none of these feelings, that's also a good test for our everyday practice. When we trace back like a detective, we trace back our feelings to the cause. When we find that the cause is not material, it wasn't caused by something in this world, then we'll know that we've completed our research on that feeling. When I have a feeling of worry, and I trace it back to where it came from, and I understand that, well, it came because my bicycle broke, so it has a material cause, then we know that we have not come to the end of the analysis, that the research has to continue. The research in our feelings has to continue. But when we research a feeling, and it takes us back only to feeling, then we will have arrived. We have finished the research. Prabhupada says, the Lord and his devotees simultaneously perceive the Ladani potency directly by the power of Samvit potency. So this means that this pleasure-giving energy, we understand it through our consciousness. And the Lord and the pure devotees do this perfectly. We understand, we can think, we can see our emotions, like I was just saying, and understand them completely. But what's interesting is that this way of observing divine energy, divine potency, this too is a kind of Manjari consciousness. Again, what is the consciousness of Manjari? What is the mood of Manjari? It is to understand the feelings of those engaged in divine love and to serve those feelings. Well, devotees have these feelings too, in a very, very small way. But nonetheless, in our work to realize that our everyday lives are done in service of the divine, and when we understand this, then there's a mood of Manjari there. When we're there to serve the love, by building a house, by cooking the bread, by baking the bread, there is Manjari consciousness there. The material modes of nature, says Prabhupada, control the conditioned souls. But the Supreme Personality of Godhead is never influenced by these modes, as all Vedic literature directly and indirectly corroborate. Corroborate, that means proves or confirms. Lord Krishna himself says in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam the following: the material modes of goodness, passion and ignorance, so the three gunas, are connected with the conditioned souls, but never with me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then Prabhupada says, well, the Vishnu Purana says the same thing. The Vishnu Purana says the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, is beyond the three qualities of goodness, passion and ignorance. No material qualities exist in him. May that original person, Narayan, who is situated in a completely transcendental position, be pleased with us. And Prabhupada continues his readings in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Indra praises Krishna as follows: my dear Lord, your abode is Vishuddha Sattva, so purity, goodness, always undisturbed by the material qualities. And the activities that are in transcendental loving service unto your feet. The goodness, austerity, and penance of the devotees enhance such activities, which are always free from contamination of passion and ignorance. Material qualities cannot touch you under any circumstances. Prabhupada says then in comment, when not manifested, the modes of material nature are said to be in goodness. So when, as we just saw in these quotations, Krishna has no relation to these material connections, the gunas. And even a devotee who is very realized, very pure, can have little attachment to these material modes, and that person is in goodness, Vishuddha Sattva. When they are externally manifested and active in producing the varieties of material existence, they are said to be in passion. And when there is a lack of activity and variegatedness, they are said to be in ignorance, tamas. In other words, the pensive mood is goodness, activity is passion, and inactivity is ignorance. So he's just explaining for us the three gunas that we've studied earlier: sattva, rajas, tamas. But he says that above all of these connections, above all of these manifestations, is Vishuddha Sattva, the pure goodness. And then he goes back to the three parts of God, the three internal energies, the three spiritual energies, which we know pretty well by now. Sandhini, existence, Samvit, knowledge, and Ladani, pleasure-giving. So Prabhupada says, and now we're coming to the end of this commentary, when it is predominated by the Sandhini potency, it is perceivable as the existence of all that be. When predominated by the Samvit potency, it is perceived as knowledge in transcendence. And when predominated by the Ladini potency, it is perceived as the most confidential love of Godhead. So Ladini potency is the one that's at the heart of bhakti. But there are three dimensions to devotion. Ladini is the strongest, but consciousness is there too, and existence is, of course, there. And now Prabhupada says, Vishuddha Sattva, purity, the simultaneous manifestation of these three in one is the main feature of the kingdom of God. The absolute truth is therefore the substance of reality, eternally manifest in three energies. Remember that absolute truth is the very special words that Prabhupada uses to describe God in the form of Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Absolute truth is not the king, is not the controller, is not the absolute reality. He's the full experience of these three elements of existing, of knowing, and above all, of feeling. The manifestation of the internal energy of the Lord is the inconceivably variegated spiritual world. The manifestation of the marginal energy comprises the living entities, and the manifestation of the external energies is the material cosmos. So here we're opening a new chapter, even though we're coming to the end of our class. But to make it very short, Krishna has three types of energy. Internal energy, which are spiritual, transcendental. Marginal or subtle energy, which is what inhabits all those beings who have consciousness and memory and intelligence. And then external energy is material energy. That's the energy that supports all those beings who do not have consciousness. Of these three, of course, the spiritual energy is most important. And in the spiritual energy, the most important is again the pleasure energy, the Ladini Shakti. So then Prabhupada says the absolute truth includes four principles: the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself, His internal energy, His spiritual energy, His marginal energy, and His external energy. The form of the Lord and the expansions of His form as Svayam Rup, so intrinsic or true form, and Vaibhava Praksha, that is opulence, are directly the enjoyers of the internal energy, which is the external exhibitor of the spiritual world, the most confidential of the manifestation of energy. What Prabhupada is trying to say is that everything that happens in our minds, everything that happens in the material world is caused by that spiritual energy, the internal energy of Krishna, led by the Ladini Shakti, the loving energy. And again, the external manifestation, the material energy, provides the covering bodies of the conditioned living entities, from Brahma down to the insignificant ant. So the material energy is the covering energy, the external energy, the covering energy. The covering energy is manifested under the three modes of material nature and appreciated in various ways by living entities in both the higher and lower forms of life. So the fact that we have material bodies, plastic bodies, we are aware of that, and we find that very difficult sometimes. We get tired, we get hungry, and so on. But other beings, like plants, don't get tired and don't get complaining, and they don't feel complaints about their bodies. So they're experienced in different ways. Prabhupada says, each of the three divisions of the internal potency, the Sandhani, Sambit, and Ladani energies, influences one of the external potencies by which the conditioned souls are conducted. So each of the three, being, knowledge, and happiness, bliss, have a particular impact on the way our material bodies are experiencing the world. And finally, such influence manifests the three qualitative modes of material nature. So the three gunas, the sattva, rajas, and tamas. Proving definitely that living entities, the marginal potency, are eternally servitors of the Lord, and therefore controlled by either the internal or the external potency. That's the last word of the commentary for this verse. A little bit heavy. If we tried to make a light version, it would be something like this. The internal pleasure-giving energy of the Lord is present in every material being. Present in very different ways, but nonetheless present. So whenever we see a material object, we can understand that the living and also loving energy of God is somewhere energizing that entity. And our meditation can then be how? Which one? Where is their love in that object? Where is their desire coming? What is the direction? What is the meaning of the pleasure that it perceives, if any? That is always the question that we can ask in our everyday sadhana, our everyday practice. What is the meaning of the feelings that I feel? What is the meaning of the feelings that I see manifested in others?